Thank y'all for coming out to the third installment of the Building With series. This is a Saturday afternoon discussion series on architecture and development. The way the programming will work today is I will ask Dr. Diane Jones-Allen, who we have here with us today, a couple of questions that will last anywhere between 30 minutes to an hour. And then I will open up the floor for questions for Diane after that. So if you could all hold your questions until that would be awesome. So with that said, thank you, Diane, for coming to join us today. And we can get started. So Diane, can you tell us a little about yourself? Like what interests and paths led you to the work that you do today?
Okay, so well, as a kid, I was a Girl Scout, so I really love nature. So I actually grew up in Baltimore, Maryland. So I grew up in a city. I lived in a typical Baltimore row house. Luckily, we lived on the end of the row, and my father was born in Blackstock, South Carolina, which is a Black incorporated town. He's very proud of it. Outside of Charlotte. And so he came up to Baltimore in the Great Migration, but he brought all that kind of farming. So even though we lived in a row house, but we lived on the end of the row, we had a really large yard. So he was always gardening, right? And then I remember at the time I was going to school, it was like post busing, like the 70s. And so, I was going out to, to a school in a white neighborhood, and I would always notice like the trees, how they would increase, and then just, so this stuff really interested me. Although I was artistic person, when it came to high school, I danced, I did ballet and tap, but I also painted and drew. So I ended up going to school for fine arts with my major was in painting. And I was actually about to go to either the Winchester School in Delaware or either the school in Brussels to study art restoration. I had this vision of being in the Louvre, or either the Rinks, restoring the Night Watch or something. That was my dream. But I got, when I took the GRA, I got this information about coming to this summer program up at Harvard that was called Career Discovery. And I thought, oh, it's a summer. I'll go up there before I go off to, the Winchester School. But the program was in the GSD. And I fell in love with something called landscape architecture, which I had never heard of, which even to this day, I'm the director of the landscape architecture program at UTA. And still students, they'll go into architecture and then they'll see the landscape architecture work and say, oh, that's what I really want to do. Because the great thing about landscape architecture, it put together my artistic interests, my interests about giving back and about, urban form and, the built environment. So that's basically my path. I didn't go off to Winchester School, and I didn't end up at the Rinks. I ended up going to UC Berkeley and studied landscape architecture. And I think my choice of Berkeley was influenced me because there I met Randy Hester and Claire Cooper Marcus, who were really about impacting communities. And it was Berkeley, which is, a place that is about, it's on, it's one of the schools that are current on the list because of their forward thinking. And so I think that shaped me. Being at UC Berkeley, had I gone to Harvard or Penn or UVA, which also have really good landscape architecture programs, I'm glad I went to Berkeley. That shaped me. And then I ended up, after that, I ended up in New Orleans. Actually, I've lived in New Orleans more. That's the place I've lived the most in my whole adult life because my ex-husband was a native, and natives always want to go home. He had gone to Stanford, and I met him, and he wanted to come home. And I remember crying all the way because I kept thinking, I don't want to live in Louisiana. I don't want to live in the South. And I fell in love with it, which people do. And like I said, I've lived there even after, we got divorced. I stayed there and I started my own firm. And I worked, for Billis Manning Architects, which is now Manning Architects. I worked for them for a long time. I did work with Hewitt Washington. I ended up starting my own firm because I got 16 Head Start playgrounds. And that was really good to start a new business with that much work. But that came because Hewitt Washington, which was a Black architecture firm, they had got this job to do playgrounds, but they're architects and architects don't do playgrounds. So I ended up starting, and I stayed in New Orleans until Katrina, and I never thought about being a professor. I always thought about practice. But when Katrina happened, I happened to be in Tanzania doing some work. And so when I came back, I couldn't really come back. I ended up going back to Baltimore, and I started teaching at Morgan State, which is an HBCU, which also kind of shapes when I get to talk about the work that my firm, Now Design Jones does. Being at an HBCU really shaped also the focus of the kind of work I do. And but then I got a call from Austin Allen, who I ended up marrying, to come, and he was doing some work in the Lower Ninth Ward with Make It Right, because those houses, which, I mean, if they had issues, but there wasn't a lot of thought to the environment or how people live. So he was doing a project called Community Beyond Housing. And then when I came back to live, when we got married, we lived in the Lower Nine. And that really shaped because post Katrina, I'd only been to the Lower Nine a few times. I worked on the original MLK school with Hewitt Washington. But post Katrina, I ended up living there, which really shaped my understanding. And I'll stop. You asked me a simple question. I'm going all over the place. But that shaped, living in the Lower Nine shaped my understanding of the environment, right? Because for 20 years, I'd lived on the other side of the bridge, and because of the way New Orleans is a bowl, I never really understood that we were surrounded by water, or the Bayou River system, how we connect to the Gulf. But once you live in the Lower Nine, especially once they put that platform there and you get to go up there and you kind of all of a sudden understand, because you can live in New Orleans and not see the water, right? Because it's flat and the view shed is very small, right? And there's no high, unless you go up on the levee, high places to understand the landscape. But living in the L9 really got me to understand the landscape and understand what really happened in Katrina and how that water system works. So to answer your question, those kind of shaped, it's my whole life in a nutshell, shaped, my life and why I teach and practice landscape architecture. So I can't hear you if you're asking me a question.
For a second.
Try that.
Yeah, it's a good. I just wanted to say thank you for. Give us 1 second. I think we're in
Turn your volume off.
I think it is all.
Try now.
Charles, you're on mute.
Okay, you need to unmute you, and then I'll mute this.
All right, so can y'all hear me? It's a little echoey still.
Try now.
Hello? Testing. 1, 2, 3. Okay. All right. Thank y'all for bearing with us. A new hybrid format that first time we're doing this. So Diane, can you tell us a little bit more about Design Jones LLC? What is the ethos of the company, and how do you all go about incorporating that into the projects that you've worked on?
Sure. So, Design Jones LLC, it was started it really got started not until 2009. I had another firm, Terra Designs, but I had closed it right, around Katrina because I moved. But so then I started Design Jones LLC in 2009 with Austin Allen. He's the other partner in the firm. And really, it was to kind of deal with community-based work and, access to, better built environments. And then it turns out later, like we've ended up doing a lot of memorial kind of work. And also it was to do more grassroots, projects that are not just public, because a lot of public work is not really grassroots in that, like it might be funded by the state or but that are funded by like nonprofits or not funded, but projects that, come from the community or nonprofits, and also, that usually get grant or some kind of public funding. And so it was, and an opportunity to work with people and groups that were kind of interested in the same kind of things that we were, and also to put some of our research into action. So that's kind of what we do. I mean, so for instance, in New Orleans, like we did Hayden Plaza, which is MLK, that median that's there off of Aretha Castle Haley. Like we worked on that project, but that was way back in 2015. And then recently we've worked on this through different iterations and different forms, the Claiborne Corridor Innovation District, which has been quite interesting. We worked on it in 2013 when it was a large DOTD HUD project with two outside firms. We were a local consultant, Kittleson and Goody Clancy, which were actually looking at if you take the bridge down, if you don't. And one of the interesting things they found out was that some people didn't want the bridge down. It's not that they didn't understand what happened and how that the longest stand of oak trees in North America got destroyed by that freeway, but they felt that if you take it down, the community wouldn't claim it. And so we've been working with Nairi and Ujamaa on the Claiborne Corridor Innovation District. And there's like controversy in that there's still community people that want it down and people that, but I really think their idea is not about not taking it down, because of course you would want it down. It's more about claiming the space underneath so that when it does come down, it doesn't become, I've seen plans, that it becomes this boulevard, right, with a lovely open canal. Well, you can't second line in that. You can't do the thing out in Mardi Gras. So it's more about claiming the space underneath. So when it does come down, the community, So, I mean, that's the kind of work we do. So in other places, so we're working on a lynching memorial in Fort Worth for Fred Rouse. And I can talk about that later, because I think one of your questions was, what are the two projects that I like the most? And one is this Fred Rouse Memorial, but also we're working on a project in Piqua, Ohio, the Randolph Free Peoples Project, and that's a very interesting story. And then back in Louisiana, we just finished the Liberation Labyrinth with two amazing people. I'm sure you know Joy and Joe, of the Descendants Project. I don't know if you know them, but you should get connected. And these are two sisters who live in Edgard, Louisiana, and they actually stopped this this refinery. It was a grain refinery from coming to Edgard, and they purchased the plantation that the Woodlands plantation that the revolt, like one of the few slave revolts that happened in Louisiana, the 1811 revolt, is started at that plantation. They purchased that, and then they purchased this other land where they wanted to do a memorial. So they got a grant from the Monuments Lab to do a different kind of memorial. So they hired us to work with them on that. And we just finished the concepts drawings, and we did engagement. So that, I mean, that's the kind of work that we like to do. We like to work with people that are, you know, trying to make a difference, tell a story, protect the environment, protect the history. Yeah. And so that kind of work does not make one rich. And so luckily we still teach. But I like teaching too, because I feel like I'm impacting the next generation of landscape architects and making sure that this profession, you know, goes within the future. And actually my teaching kind of it feeds the design work, because, you know, it gives me a chance to, you know, research and study, you know, like that. I was lucky to get a fellowship at Dumbarton Oaks, where I got a whole year with access to all of Harvard's libraries and the Library of Congress to do all this work on maroons. So teaching kind of feeds the firm work, because it gives you, you know, that research and time for thought. But it also, I feel like I'm helping to shape the future, because unfortunately I will not be here, and I hope that there will be young people that will want to continue to do the kind of work that I'm doing, that doesn't pay a lot but makes you feel really great.
I think there will be something about
Oh, you're breaking up. I can't hear it. Yeah, I didn't get the question or what you said.
Okay. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Can everybody in the video hear me? You can hear me, Diane?
Yes, I can hear you now. Yeah, you're not breaking up either.
So you mentioned maroons for a bit, and how can we delve into the past for a bit? Can you tell us a little bit more about your research into maroons? Like who is the maroon community and what stands out about their history?
Okay, so I'll try not to make it too long, but I'll give you like how I got there. So I got there because of a wonderful person who I guess died about 3 years ago. His name was John Winford Taylor, and he was a New Orleans resident, and he was also kind of he was an artist. Like he whittled or carved these beautiful canes and pieces of art that he took photographs too of the bayou, because he lived in the lower Ninth Ward. And so he would walk like that whole circular thing to along the river, through the industrial canal lock. I don't know how he would get through there, and then all the way around to the, but that's because he like grew up there. And I think people didn't really appreciate him until Katrina. Like he grew up like in the bayou when it was a cypress forest, right? Because I think John Taylor was close to 80 when he died. So he was a kid, like, you know, in the pre-Mr. Go. So like in the 40s, late 30s, 40s, he was a kid. And so he would go back in the bayou and fish and, you know, pick herbs and all kinds of things. So I think, you know, like we don't like appreciate the people that are just, but once Katrina happened and people started coming and wanted to understand the bayou, it was John Taylor, you know, and so he worked a lot with CSCD and did tours. And then I just thought his life was really interesting, and I was like learning a lot from him. So I asked him if he could come to my office, because we had our Design Jones office in the L9, if he would come to my office on every Wednesday. And then we would just talk and I would record it. And so, you know, that's when he was telling me about being a kid and how to catch cowan, and, you know, how to catch turtles and what he used to fish, and how he would get through the triangle by, you know, on a pirogue through pulling, you know, like the cypress, because there were that many cypress, and you know, about the water, you know, he was just telling me all this stuff. And so I just mentioned it to Austin. I said, wow, he literally lived in there and he understood all this stuff. And so Austin said, yeah, he was like a Maroon. And I said, like a Maroon? You mean like the Maroons that liberated Haiti or were in Suriname and, you know, Brazil, you know, in the Quiambos, those kind of Maroons? He said, yeah. I said, there were no Maroons in North America. What are you talking about? And Austin said, you need to do your research. There were Maroons in North America and some right there in the bayou. So that's what made me leap to Maroons was John Taylor, because, you know, John Taylor would say he was more alive back in those swamps, you know, especially growing up in Jim Crow in Louisiana than he was, you know, in the dry land, you know, walking around New Orleans. He felt freer in the swamp. So that's when I found out about St. Malo and, you know, the Maroon community that was back there. But the thing for me, and then there were many books, but there were some books really great. Sylvia Deuve, that Louisiana. There's several books already written about Maroons and even Louisiana Maroons. They're mentioned in other books about Maroons, but they always kind of positioned which, you know, Maroons in terms of liberation, which they were about, you know, they basically, I love the Maroons because they decided, you know, I'm not going up north. Like, you know, they could have, like, there were many, enslaved people in Louisiana and elsewhere that escaped more than they want to tell us. You know, there was, you know, and people who revolted. There are a lot of people who escaped, but you know, most of them were envisioning escaping north or going to Canada. But the thing I liked about the Maroons is that they said it's all messed up, right? Like, you know, why do I want to go up there and deal with that, right? I'm still going to be, you know, not free to, you know, because I still will have to adjust to the norms or the things that, you know, self-liberated people who went north and tried to participate in society. So they decided that, you know, I don't want to participate in that society. I want a society of my own. So they went into remote areas in Louisiana, and also in the United States, like in the Great Dismal Swamp between North and South Carolina. You know, so they went to places like that where they could try to create their own society. So yes, they were about the idea of being free and self-determination, and a lot of books, but not many of them were connecting them to environmental resiliency and to, you know, landscape and coastal restoration. And so that's what I realized. I like, they were like the first environmentalists, right? Like, they understood that preservation of this particular, especially like in Louisiana, of the wetland landscape meant freedom, right? Because for them, literally it meant freedom, but for the rest of us, and it took people along the coast and even, you know, the settlers and colonists, because, you know, they kept filling it, they kept destroying it, but it took a while to realize that, you know, this landscape means that you're free to be here. You know, they didn't understand like the ecosystem services or the things that, all they realized that, oh, it's bad land and we need to fill it so we can extend agriculture. And, but Maroons understood that really early. So, you know, my research pulled upon other research about Maroons, but then it kind of tried to expose the fact that they understood the function of this landscape and how we can learn from what they do, what they've done today. And, you know, it gets more and more important to me because, as we've just witnessed this past week, the climate issues become more and more. And obviously, we're not approaching it right. So I feel like the way they approach the land is a kind of a paradigm or a set of tenets that we can apply today. So that's kind of what my Maroon research is about.
Thank you for explaining that to us, Diane. That kind of fits perfectly into the next question. So what lessons do you think your research into the past have to offer us today in terms of adaptability, resiliency, and sustainability? Like how did they adapt culturally and things like that?
Okay, so one of the first things that you learn from it is that, from them, is like you can't ignore it, right? So, so our approach, you know, for instance, you know, in Louisiana, one of the things that initially was done was to build flood walls and levees, right? Not to understand that, yes, the you know, so the Delta Plain, the river, the Mississippi River actually formed natural levees, right? But then we decided we're going to build them more and we're going to put walls. And what that does, that gives you this false sense of security, right? Because you can't see it, right? So if you can't see it, then, you know, you can't, you know, deal with it until it's broken the walls and flooded your, right? So the first thing is to, you know, is to be aware of it, right? So, I mean, you learned that from them because they decided we're going to go live in it, right? Because for others, yes, it was, you're right. I mean, there are reasons why they drained swamps, you know, some was disease and mosquitoes, and, you know, if you're trying to do agriculture, right? But then there was an attempt to kind of wipe it out. And then when you couldn't, just to get it out of your, you know, you can't see it, it's blocked out on the other side of the wall. So for them, you learn that, you know, you can actually live with it and you can live with it. So that's, to me, is like one of the biggest lessons that, and I think, you know, post-Katrina, you know, especially in New Orleans, there have been a lot of, you know, projects, government, public and private citizens, and, you know, designers, you know, immediately realizing, you know, we gotta learn how to live with it, right? Even though, you know, we still went and rebuilt the flood walls, which I read something recently that they're still having problems with them. But, but anyway, so I think the first thing is like, we have to live with this landscape, right? We can't block it out, you know, we have to live with it and in it, right? And how do you do that? So that's the first thing. And the second thing is because as it goes, we go, right? So the more you deplete the wetlands, I mean, that's why it's so great. You know, one of the organizations you're with, you know, Common Ground, that they're trying to restore it, because I think they realized that. And that was something that Maroons understood, that this place meant freedom, you know. And like, you know, what do you mean by freedom? Freedom means a lot of things. So, but for people in Louisiana, the big thing that Katrina showed, that freedom meant having the ability to live where you want to live. And you can't, you know, if we don't respect the landscape and it starts to impact where we want to live, then we're not free to live there. So so the next thing is from them learning that, you know, as that landscape, because for them, you know, it meant the more you you know, destroyed. So, and that was part of the thing that happened with the Maroons in Louisiana, as opposed to, so just a few weeks ago, I was really lucky. I actually was in Jamaica, and I got to go up to Acapong, which is the Maroon community, where these Maroons got a treaty with the British in 1739, which actually gave them the land. And they're still living there. And they're still living there in this kind of natural way, like up in the hills, right? This Maroon community. So I went and visited them. But, you know, unfortunately, the Maroons in Louisiana got, you know, wiped out for several reasons, not just because of capture and those kind of things, but because, you know, they started, for money, they started going in timbering, right? And, you know, handing off the timber, because they knew they were back in the wetlands. So handing off the timber to the slaves that were working for timbering companies. So they were actually cutting down their freedom, right? Because the denser the forest, the less it was harder to find them, right? So that's, you know, like that understanding that, you know, how to protect the place that you live, right? How to take care of it. But you do have to live, like they did have to live. So they did do some timber. I mean, at first they did, until, you know, the money factor came in. But initially they did do some timbering where they used girdling, which they weren't chopping. They were letting the trees naturally fall. You know, they tried to actually go to just higher mounds and use the landscape, you know, as barriers and cover. They lived off of, you know, so they tried to live, they did some farming, but they tried to live off of, you know, the natural things, seeds and roots and plants that kind of grew naturally within the landscape. But I think, you know, one of the biggest lessons from them is, yeah, to understand the landscape, to protect it, to live with it, to kind of have a reciprocal and symbiotic relationship with it. Because yes, I mean, we're in, you know, a century. Yeah, yes, we want homes, we want industry. I'm not saying we shouldn't have that. We should have that, but we should do it more with in mind that we have to protect this landscape, especially if we're coastal communities in Louisiana. Yeah. I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah, I think that answers my question. I also kind of want to go into like what insights do you think your research into the maroon communities of the past have to offer in terms of kind of like the history of collaboration between different groups of people, or collaboration, just like different people, groups of people crossing paths and helping each other?
That's a great question. Okay, so on one hand, like, I guess on the kind of the micro level, so maroons were more collective kind of collaboratives. That's kind of one thing you learn from them too, that they kind of, as a unit, they work together, right? So you know, they would farm together, you know, build these communities together, and that was because, yeah, in order to survive this particular landscape and to survive the threat from outside, which was, you know, people wanted to capture them because they were like a threat to the system, right? So, you know, they lived collaboratively, but they also interacted and collaborated with other groups within the that wetland, especially the wetlands within Louisiana, the Bayou Bienvenue and the central Louisiana wetlands, because there were other groups there living there for similar and different reasons. So there were native communities, there were indigenous communities, the Chittimaca, especially in that particular wetland, they were like named the people of the water. So they were living in there. Other native peoples were living in that wetland landscape. And then also there were, you know, the people that were expelled from British Columbia that came down, where we, you know, the current, you know, ancestors of the Cajun community that came down that were expelled. So you had these, you know, three groups, or, you know, and like I said, there were several native communities there, different tribes. And you had them all like living, and, you know, and especially the native communities and the maroon communities, they kind of shared the threat. It's kind of the same people that were threatening them, right? And then the other community, you know, came down to live in this landscape because they had a threat from above that they were coming down to escape. And so, I mean, I think that's what makes Louisiana like Louisiana. So interesting, right? So, you know, the Chittimaca were teaching, you know, the Maroons about like basket weaving, even though they were doing some basket weaving that they got from, you know, Africa, and they were exchanging the techniques that the Chittimaca would, because they would use those were tools like to catch fish and do, you know, so they were exchanging the making of tools, right? With the Cajuns, there was like a change of like what each other were eating, right? Their food ways. So there was a lot of interchange in that. And so like, and then they would like exchange, you know, what was happening with the threat. So they would exchange information. So that was, and a lot of that exchange, like I said, is, you know, became like set and, you know, detectable parts of Louisiana culture, the melding of their exchange. One interesting thing is that So having lived in, New Orleans for a long time, but, not having been born there, but I was lucky because my ex-husband was born there. And, everybody, he tracks his, so he was definitely, he was a New Orleanian, so it was great for me because I instantly, when I came there, I instantly got access to a place that's often hard. You think you know it, but it's very well. it's not as easy to get access to, the real natives. But I married into it, so it was easy to get access to it. So, for a long time, not for a long time, but for many times, I didn't quite understand Mardi Gras Indians or Black Indians. And, over time, and then also like having access to like Malik Rahim and other people that, came from this culture, know it, and then, having access to people that were Mardi Gras Indians because, becoming, through connections, like Keith and Chandra Calhoun are really good friends of mine, and they're really good friends with the Indian tribe. So like learning and understanding that so there are a lot of misconceptions. Well, I won't say they're misconceptions, but there are different narratives about that culture. Okay. So one narrative, and this is the one I truly believe, this comes from Malik and some of the, Black Indians that I talk to, is that they are, and then they are directly related to the Maroons. So, that you hear that, they were, because, and this is true too, they say, that they're, doing the way they dress and the beating, all that, is a tribute. But it actually directly comes out of Maroon culture. And it makes so much sense to me. For instance, spy boys, right? Well, spy boys, Maroons had spy boys because that would be someone who would go out, which would make sense. You're living in the wetlands, right? So you got to have somebody that would go out to spy to see if, there were catchers coming or whatever. So a lot of those terms and, that they use within Indian, Mardi Gras Indian culture or Black Indian culture comes directly from Maroons. Like, Malik says they were the first Mardi Gras Indians. And then he gives me all kinds of examples of, which I talk about a little in my book, so that shows you like how those cultures melded and how they impact us today, and we don't even acknowledge or know about it, which is pretty amazing. Yeah. And even like the Maroon or the community, that was that Filipino community called Saint Malo. And to me, that's so amazing. Talk about like cultural connection. So they located that community, and they're actually drawings of their houses. So if you look up Saint Malo, you'll actually get drawings of the Filipino community that was there. But they named it Saint Malo because they built it on top of the original Saint Malo community. That's where it's located. So they knew about it, which is amazing to me, and they paid these Filipinos, they paid homage to this Maroon community that was before them by building where they were going to live in the wetlands on top of it. So that's pretty amazing. So yeah, there's all this cultural connection, which I think is, why, once, like Louisiana is amazing, because of it. There's no place like it. And the more you, well, not just live there, try to understand the complications or the wonderful complications of the culture and the history and learn about it. Yeah, it's just kind of mind blowing and amazing.
Thanks again for sharing that, Dan. That was pretty.
Sorry to get so excited. I can't help it. I'm sorry. I get so passionate about it. I'm sorry. I'll calm down. Let you know. get me talking about it. I get so excited.
Diane, you can't switch that fast. We're
Oh, I can hear a single thing you just said. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Oh, that's okay. I said I apologize for getting so excited about it when I'm talking because I get really passionate about it, and I'm sorry.
You should never apologize for that.
Well, you know.
Yeah, that's why we have you here, because you're so passionate about it, and we want to learn about your passion. So you mentioned the Filipino community. So outside of your research into Maroon communities, are there any other kind of like historical sites or communities that you find particularly interesting?
Yes. So, you know, unfortunately, but anyway, but it's been really great. So I moved to Texas because, you know, this opportunity to direct this landscape architecture program came about. And so when I was in Texas, you know, of course, I started doing some research on Texas, and I ended up working on a project, actually got a grant to look at the freedmen communities along the Trinity River. So there were actually several freedmen communities in Texas, and I was looking at these 5 communities, and you know, it was pretty amazing, like because often that's another thing, you know, like history, there's kind of like myth and the history, and then you kind of like go in and understand, you know, because Texas is quite interesting because, you know, Texas was, so I have a lot of Latina students and friends, and they keep saying this is Aztec land, you know, it's really Mexico. And they're right. Texas really was Mexico, and there was slavery in Texas. I mean, there was slavery in Mexico, and then part of Mexico said, we don't want to have slavery, and the people that did, they broke off and made Texas. But it's interesting too, because another thing was happening, like, you know, enslaved people were, you know, escaping the South and, you know, Southeast and moving west, right? And moving into Texas, where parts of it, you know, there still was slavery, and then some of them, the freedmen actually were able to settle along the river and have freed communities at the same time, which is amazing. But which is not really that amazing to Louisiana, because in Louisiana during slavery, you had a large population of freed people of color. So this was happening along the Trinity River. And a lot of these communities, well, you know, these 5, their descendants are still living in the same places today. But they have pressure, they have development pressure, because they're actually along the river. And, you know, for a long time along the river, that's where, you know, it was the, you know, the swampy land, the not needed land, or it was like areas for industry or port access, but it wasn't where people wanted to live. And then all of a sudden, riverside development became, you know, really, you know, where people wanted to live. And, you know, now they build commercial and recreational and even, you know, mixed use developments along the river. And that's happening along the Trinity River, especially near downtown Dallas. And there are 2 Freedmen Towns communities, the Bottoms, that's what the community is called, and then Joppy, which are along the Trinity River. And Joppy is beautiful, like it sits along the river and the lakes and this preserve. And they have, you know, these gentrification pressures where for a long time they were left alone, or like there was some industry there. But so now these communities are facing, you know, that kind of pressure because the land's now desirable. And that happens a lot, especially with, you know, Black communities or communities of color. They end up in places where nobody wants until all of a sudden they want them, you know. So that's been really interesting. And we've been doing, you know, a lot of work with them. Like, for instance, Joppy, we did a land development and plan to help them kind of map out how they should grow, you know, what should happen there in terms of like building more affordable housing and what, how, so, and making an agreement with, the state and the city to enforce this plan. So they don't just get like pushed and wiped out. And the same thing too with Garden of Eden. We've been doing a master plan for them to help them stabilize, we're calling it like a land stabilization plan, so that they can stay, but that, to be realistic, yeah, even these communities, they want new development. They want, a nice coffee shop and new development and all those kind of things, but they want to be able to stay in it and enjoy it. Because usually new development comes and they get pushed out because, property values go up, land gets, taken, or all kinds of things. So helping them kind of work out how development can come, but that they can be a part of it and stay and keep their homes, but also have the benefits of new development. So that's been interesting. And like I said, the history of that's interesting because I didn't know much about the history of Texas, only, what I read a little bit, but, actually being here and hearing, firsthand from, longtime Texans and longtime Mexicans that are living here about the real history of Texas and how it, works, and then understanding the interesting history of, the Western migration of enslaved and free people of color. It's been quite interesting too.
Okay, so thank you for sharing that too. That kind of leads us into the last question for me, at least. I'm sure that everyone else has a few questions, but are there any other projects that you're currently working on that you are pretty excited about at the moment?
Yes. So I'll talk about the Randolph Free People, which is in Piqua, Ohio. So this is just really interesting and amazing story. So in 1831, there was a slave owner called Randolph. He was in Virginia. He had the largest tobacco plantation like along the eastern seaboard. He had 400 slaves, which is pretty big, right? Because a lot of the plantations actually didn't have hundreds of slaves. A lot of them were a lot smaller, but he had a big plantation. So, I guess at some period, he decided, like in 1830, I guess I said 1837. So some around the 1830s, he decides, that this isn't so good, but he has, he's wealthy and he has this big plantation and he has all these slaves. So he decides that upon his death, he would free all his slaves. And so he put it in his will. But not only did he decide to free them, he also was smart enough to know that this is Virginia, right? And he had no idea that in 1865, that there'd be emancipation. But so he just figured, slavery would go on forever. So he said, this is Virginia. And if I free them, they'll only be enslaved again. So what he decided to do is he purchased land in Mercer County, Ohio. He purchased 10,000 acres of land for these 400 slaves in Mercer County, because Ohio was a free slave state. It was legally free because Ohio was, but it was a free state, right? So he died. I think I have the exact dates, in the 1840s. He ended up dying, and this was in his will, but he had children, and his children said, blank to the no, excuse my friend. They said, no way, because slaves were money. 400 slaves, that was their inheritance, they felt. They were very upset by this will. They were like, he gave them what? And he's freeing them? And they're like, who's going to run our plantation? And this is our inheritance. So for 13 years. So the Randolph freed people, that's what we'll call them, the slaves on the plantation, these 400 slaves, they get a lawyer. And and he was European, he was a white lawyer, and he fought for 13 years, and he got them free. And they got the deed to the land, and they got together and with horse and buggy and walking, they walked from Virginia to Mercer County to claim their land. But when they got there, they got to the end of the canal. When they got there, they were met. There was a large group of German immigrants also, because they were like German immigrants who lived in, settled in Louisiana too, who were there, and they stopped them. And they said, no, you cannot. And they were saying, we have the deed, that's our land over there. But they had all this land. The reason why Randolph had picked that particular location, there was already a large group of freed people there. So he figured, okay, I'll put them in Ohio, where freed people have already settled. And the Germans said, we have enough of freed people. If you 400 come, that's just too much. But you cannot come here, even though they had a deed to the land. So they were physically stopped. So they turned around to go back, and there were some people, of European descent in Piqua who said, look, you can come live in Piqua. So we'll take you. You got, So unfortunately, though, they left their 10,000 acres of land, which now I've actually been there. It's owned by other people, right? And they settled in other land in Piqua. So I guess about 2 years ago, out of the blue, we got a call from the descendants, the Randolph freed people, who so those original slaves, they enslaved people or self-liberated people or liberated people. They settled there in Piqua. They built a cemetery. They built a school. They lived, and so their descendants, who grew up there, contacted us because they wanted to restore the cemetery and also do a memorial. And then also they, believe it or not, have a lawyer, and they're actually fighting to get that 10,000 acres back, because they're like, there's a deed which they still have copies of. And, so they're fighting to get that land back. But in the meantime, they want to restore their cemetery and do a memorial to this amazing story, and do a master plan, because they want to turn this old school into a community center and, have a tour where people can. So we were so lucky that, so at first what happened is they got some money from the state to restore the cemetery, and the state hired a firm. I think they were mainly engineering, so they didn't like the plan. So they told it was the county. They told the county, we'll get our own, we'll find our own designer. So then they did some research and they found us. So that's a project we've been working on. We actually have finished the master plan. We've done the whole, all the up to design development. So we've done the concept for the memorial. We've laid out the master plan. And so that phase of the funding's done. So now they're actually getting funding to actually, turn that into construction documents and go ahead, and also hire an architect, which I hope would be Moody Nolan, which is a large African-American architecture firm, but to work on the buildings and stuff. So that I'm really excited about that. And it's such a unique story. And I think the descendants, are pretty amazing, and they're young people. They're like your age, Charles. They're young people, the children, the great grandchildren, who just stayed in Piqua and want to celebrate their history. And the land is there, that's there, but they still want the other land. Anyway, and then the other project is actually in construction. We're finishing up construction documents, and we're going to break ground which is so exciting. And we're thinking like November to break ground. And this is the thing about design, you know, landscape and architecture projects. They take so long. But I mean, people don't see, they just see something go up, but it's usually like even I mean, if something can get from, you know, initial concept idea to construction documents in a year, I mean, if you can break ground in a year, that's a miracle. But usually projects take several years just because there's a lot of phasing and plus, you know, with our projects, we always want to do engagement. You know, we always want to engage not just with the client, but the community and the users. And, you know, so these processes take a long time. So we've been working on this project since 2022 is when we got hired, and we're finally breaking ground, you know, to do the construction in November. And so this project is another very interesting story. So Fred Rouse worked at a meat packing plant in 1921 in Fort Worth. And they actually do a tour of his story, the Tarrant County Peace and Justice Coalition, and that's who actually hired us to do this memorial to him. So he was a meat packer, and the workers in the plant were going on strike. But the thing is that at that time, African Americans could not be part of the union. So because, you know, they could be part of the union and they wouldn't get any of the benefits. So the white workers were going on strike, but they didn't want the African American workers to go into work, of course, because they didn't want them to break the strike line. But Fred Rouse felt like, okay, I can't be part of the union and I need to feed my family. So he went to work. And of course, he got attacked and he was left for dead. And in this story, the police are the good guys. The police came and pretended he was dead. And the mob went away and they put him in the car and they took him to the hospital. So they took him to the Black hospital. And on the tour, they actually take you to the meatpacking plant and then you go to the hospital. So that hospital still exists in downtown Fort Worth. So they took him to this. It was like a public hospital that had a colored ward in the basement. So they took him there. So somebody, and he was there for a couple of days, but somebody told somebody. And so a mob comes there, and I guess out of fear, the doctors hand him over. So they hand him over to the mob and they take him to this place that was officially called the lynching tree. So this is in 1921. And he was lynched. And actually, if you go to the lynching memorial in Montgomery, right? I don't know if you've ever been there. It's amazing. It's an amazing landscape and center. It's worth a trip. So they have like these pillars of every county in the United States, and they have the names of the people that were lynched there. So Fred Rouse, his name is for Tarrant County, Texas. His name is up there on one of those. Anyway, so Fred Rouse was lynched on this tree. So we go to like around 2018 or 2016. So, you know, he was lynched. That was that. There was this Tarrant County Peace and Justice Coalition, and they were doing research on the history of lynching and that history. And I don't know if it came from that, they're finding out that his name, one of the names, they were looking at the names that they had in Montgomery and saw that there was a Tarrant County person. So they find his grandson, and it turns out that his grandson, of course, never knew his grandfather because he was born after his grandfather was lynched, and he never knew the story. And at first, when they called him, he didn't believe it was him. And then he talked to brothers, cousins, and finally, because he said that their parents never talked about it, and found out that it was him. So anyway, so they got funds to build a memorial to Fred Rouse, and they had a RFP, and we won that, and so we're working on that. And actually, like I said, it's about to be going to the groundbreaking, and I really like what we did. It went through a lot. Like we did engagement, and we came up with schemes, and the scheme that I liked didn't get picked. That often happens as a designer. but you have to kind of have faith in all three of it. We showed all of them that year. So the one that they picked was one I designed, so I was fine. But they the nice thing about it is it also has a theme of sustainability and resilience, about being resilient, having to live with and through this history, but also resilience of the land. So we have, instead of having fountains, because originally there were fountains, we turned them into rain gardens and then we have this water collection system, so the water gets recycled and used for landscaping the garden before it goes into the system. So I really like that. But so if you're ever in Fort Worth, come see the Fred Rouse Memorial.
Definitely. I definitely want to check out a couple of the sites that you mentioned. Thank you so much for sharing this kind of like wealth of information with us today. Those are the ends of my questions, but I'm sure somebody in the audience has some questions to ask, so we can open up the floor for questions. I don't know if we want to switch between the people in person or the people on Zoom. Guess we can.
Question to start off with.
Yeah.
Okay. Are you able to hear me first? Okay. Can you hear me, Diane?
Yes.
Okay. So a question I have is like, so I'm not from the Sunset Arnaudvill. Can you try again?
Yeah, just turn that thing off.
Okay. So I'm not from the Sunset
Arnaudvill.
You're not from the.
Hello?
Yeah, I didn't hear the last part. You said, I'm not from the.
So you have to
I think you have to.
Can you hear me, Diane?
Yeah, I just didn't understand the last part of the statement.
So I'm not from the Sunset area, but I live here.
Okay.
And like when I'm thinking about the work that I do, I'm often asked to interpret history that I'm not a part of. And it sounds like, your work coming and living in New Orleans is that you're doing a lot of that also. So could you give us some tips about what it is to interpret history that's not your own, especially if you're a professional or somehow in an area of like land power or knowledge power? How do you, what are the lines or how do you filter that in an ethical and meaningful way?
That's a really great question. And often I get that question a lot in different ways. Like often I'll get people say, well, do you have to be African American to work on African American projects? Or you have to be, Native to work on, Or do you have to be from? And no, you don't, right? Because like you're bringing a certain set of tools and knowledge, right? And you have to realize that the people that live there, that are part of it, have a certain tools and knowledge. You kind of have to respect that. Okay, you have to value what you have, right? And then value what they have, right? The first thing, is saying, yes, I am not from here. Like they are, and they might not have design, skills. They don't know Lumion and AutoCAD, but I don't know the history of this place. And so this is going to be a great partnership, right? So I think that's the first thing, is acknowledge, because often, professionals, we want like, oh, we're being hired, so we got to come in here and know everything, but you don't. And I think often, you can see this in a lot of ways. One of my things in working in disaster recovery, like working post-Katrina in New Orleans or post-earthquake in Haiti, is that I've discovered that communities will hold back, right? Because, especially when you're in those kind of situations, right? When you're in situations where people are vulnerable and they really need this to happen because, it's about new housing or protecting, where they live or something they feel really important. Even like with that Pequot project. To them, that was their life and their community. It's really important to them. So often they'll hold back because they feel like, okay, I really want this, and I really discovered this after disaster recovery. They'll say, and I observed it, as one living and being in the lower Ninth Ward, and all kinds of people who, with all kinds of goodies or all kinds of promises for things come in. Communities will hold back because they just want, they want help. So even though sometimes they'll see that you're doing the wrong thing and you don't know, they don't want to offend you because they want the project, right? So you have to be the one to acknowledge that they have knowledge. If you let them know immediately that, like, I don't know, then they'll step up and say, okay, great, let me help you, show you, But if you come in like, I know everything, communities will just hold back because they want the project. They don't want to offend you. They don't think they're supposed to say anything. But the best part of that, I find, is to come in and like doing this work. I didn't know anything about the history of Texas, is to say, yeah, I don't know. And and I have these tools, and together we're gonna, make this happen. But I think that's it, and people appreciate that actually, because often they want a fresh eye, and then often they want to impart their knowledge, but they're often waiting for you to say, yeah, I don't know. Yeah. But I saw that a lot post-Katrina, especially in the L9, where just wouldn't say things that they knew. And then consultants and universities and people would do all kinds of stuff that didn't make sense. And that's why part of the L9 looks like Katrina just happened, with all those people that came down there. And it was just because people didn't acknowledge that people that live there knew and understood. People like John Taylor and other people know the place that they live. Doesn't mean they don't need you. But you have to realize that you need them to do what needs to be done.
I think, Nikki, you had a question?
Yeah, I had a question. Can you hear me?
Yes.
In the free towns, I lived in Houston, and I took an archaeology class, and we went out to one of the free towns out there. And my archaeologist, David Burns, he was telling me about how, like, the blue mosaics were very common. And I was wondering if that was also, like, because I knew it was there, but I didn't know about other towns that you had mentioned, and if they're out there as well, like the white and blue mosaic tiles that they would put.
The tiles with the street names, yeah.
The streets.
Yeah, you'll find that. Yeah. Yeah, I just did a project. We just did a master plan for the 4th Ward Freedmen's Town in Houston. And that one, they have those blue tiles, but actually the Freedmen's built the roads. They inlaid the bricks. And, the city was about, because, that's the dilemma, right? Like with historic places, like this place, they needed new utilities. They were old. And so the city was going to dig up that brick, and this neighborhood woman laid down in front of the bulldozer and stopped them. So the city found out that, okay, we could trench. So they, are doing the utilities, but they're saving all the bricks because the bricks were laid by the Freedmans. I don't know if that's the one that you went to in the 4th Ward. And they also have those blue tiles. Did you say something? I'm sorry, I can't hear.
Oh, thank you for sharing. No, that was it.
Yeah.
I think Adil has a question.
Hi, Dr. Allen. I'm so regretful that I missed a lot of this lecture. I just one of my friends mentioned how I would like it, and I immediately jumped on. The story, the Ohio story, really interested me. Having grown up in an all-white town, and then moving to New York City years later, I realized the way that history is taught and the way that people get a very simplified, cursory overview on purpose. It's obviously not like, oh, we're not going in deep if you're learning about, Booker T. Washington, but you're not learning about W.B. Du Bois, and that's kind of how like when I talk to people where I'm from, they have no idea about the complexities of every step of the way people were disenfranchised at every chance. These are the people you can take advantage of, do it, etc. Like in history. And I think hearing the story of the land that is now being fought over, I just briefly looked it up because I used to, well, I still do PR for initiatives in human rights and social justice. And I'm just wondering if I can ask you for a contact. I see that it hasn't reached like a national scale in news, but I think it's so emblematic of the ways that people don't realize that not just on a systemic level, but on all of these micro levels, you see huge amounts of wealth being apportioned to other people instead of the people who were legally uh legally entitled to it. So I just I feel like it's a story that I really would love to see kind of penetrate the mainstream, especially in this political climate.
Sure. So if you would give me your email address, then I can
Yeah.
email you and put you in contact with them.
Yeah, I would love that. Thank you so much.
Yeah,
I'll put it in the chat or I'll give it to Charles or something. But
okay.
yeah,
Yeah, and
thanks so much.
these stories, and from like, the Maroons to the, the even, to like the Fred Rouse story, the Piqua story, they all show you that it was very complicated. That is the history of our country, from the time it was settled. That we tend to want to make things, a black and white, and now we want to make things a brown and white issue. And if you look at this history, there were people like the white lawyer who fought for 13 years to get these people free, right? Only to be met by Germans who said no, right? But there was Mr. Randolph who had a twinge of consciousness and purchased 10,000 acres, right? So these stories are very nuanced. Like in the wetlands, the Maroons were interacting with, the Canadians, the French Canadians who had come down and interacting with So it's not, these stories are really, and that's why, and I'll get off my soapbox. It's so crazy to me, like when, like they've done in Florida and they're doing other places, like get rid of Black history. Well, Black history is American history because there are all kinds of people. And American history is all about, because it's America. It's a place that was all these interactions were happening, right? And so if you want the nuance of that, you have to tell the story of all these people because they interacted, right? Yeah. Sorry.
Yuri, do you have any questions?
I'm trying to think of a question, but it's like I just discovered the subject in a sense, I wonder what, like the Cajuns, like you can make parallels, although it's not like the Black experience. The Cajuns were like Black people in a sense, they had stigmatized the kneeling, not with the Blacks. And my young, the sharecroppers, and so in the country, my only neighbors were Black people. So I played with Black people. So it's just how
Yeah, there was a lot of integration and exchange,
the people I was raised by, I respected the Black people more than I did my family because they have more honor. I would see them working in the field. It was so hot in Louisiana, and it was like they worked so hard. Everybody worked hard, but I mean, I had a man named Arnaudvill, and he would come on his buggy. He'd pick us up on Saturday afternoons. He'd take us for a ride, and we loved that more. And no, I don't know. The Maroon, I don't know anything about it. I don't have any questions in the formula. It's just the human struggle.
Yep. Yeah, and those personal stories. I mean, that's why I love yeah, I mean, I get to research about that, but it's really nice doing projects that are about human interaction and human stories, because that's what makes Louisiana and actually our country so wonderful. We just need to acknowledge that and celebrate it.
Dr. Allen, my name is Warren Abear, and I've only visited NUNUs in Arnaudvill once, but I'm hooked. And I'll be part of the family. I want to acknowledge the feelings that I had as you were discussing all of the various engagements, relationships, and interaction between different peoples. And the word that comes to mind for me is dignity. I sense that there is sacred in the simple. And one story that comes to mind for me often is the benches that they're putting on school grounds for a child who needs to talk to someone. That bench is known as the place that if someone needs a chat, they can go and sit there. And it seems to me that some of the best gifts that we can give people with architecture, with native plants, with the way that you're doing your landscape architecture, is to create environments that lend themselves to people connecting, because there's so much that's sacred about relationships that we overlook in our very fast-paced society today. John O'Donohue, the Irish poet, made the comment to Krista Tippett on the On Being podcast once. He said that today we're getting graduate degrees in superficial acquaintances, but there are so few deep relationships anymore. So what I'm hearing from you is a lot of the good architecture essentially facilitates deeper relationships and people connecting with one another. So thank you for the many gifts that you've given us here over the past hour and 20 minutes.
Oh, thank you. And that is so important to like healing. For instance, like if a lynching memorial, or like we did the Tamir Rice Memorial in Cleveland, which was a young man who was shot by police. And in both these places, we thought, okay, you want to memorialize what happened, but you want to turn this into a place of healing, right? So in both places, we put like benches and gardens and places that, at one hand, yes, you acknowledge the incident, but how can you make this a place where we can go on from it, where we can come together, right? And that's what I love about landscape, because it has the power to do that, to impact us emotionally. So that what you said is wonderful. And I've never heard about these benches at schools, but that's like wonderful. Yeah, because having a place to like sit, there's all kinds of studies about how nature calms us and makes us more open and compassionate. Often, like when we do charrettes, you get a project and they say, get the community together. And usually they do it like in a hall or something. We always like to do ours out on the site, like to be in the landscape, right? Because there's something about being, under a tree or in the landscape that just kind of makes people calmer and, more willing to talk and to kind of understand each other, as opposed to being enclosed in a room with maps in front of you. But what you said is so powerful and meaningful, and I connect to that, and we try to do that, especially because often I feel like how can why are we memorializing a hanging, or why are we memorializing that a kid got shot? And it's like, okay, well, here's an opportunity to take this space and make understanding and healing and move on from it, right? Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, I didn't have a question. I just wanted to, and I think I'm reiterating what other people have said, but I guess it's an old Russian saying how the future is always certain, but the past is always unpredictable. And I just want to thank you with your research, your teaching, your writing, and particularly your design and your memorials of basing history and the facts, the reality, and as you say, the nuances and the complexities, which unfortunately currently is being buried.
Thank you.
Well, I have a question. I got talked about. Thank you so much. This is wonderful. It seems like your firm does a lot of storytelling and healing. And I'm wondering if there was a pivot point where you realized, like, this is what I want my firm to do, or was it like that from the very beginning?
Okay, so I had another firm, Terror Designs, and like it was kind of in the 80s and 90s. And I was lucky, I guess, because I think it was under the, I was in New Orleans when I had this firm, and it was under like the Mark Morial was the mayor. And, you know, I was getting a lot of work. There weren't that many landscape architecture firms in New Orleans at that time. Now all the biggies have come after Katrina, but then there were a few like Design Consortium. And then I started this firm. And so I was getting a lot of work, but it was like, yeah, public work. Like I worked on one of the convention center expansions. I worked on Washington Artillery Park. You know, I did. And it was great to get that kind of work. I'm proud of the work that I got to do. But when I started my firm the second time, and I was already teaching then, I decided, you know, I wanted to be, and also my partner, who's really a filmmaker. So he has a bachelor's of landscape architecture, but his master's and PhD are in film and mass communication. And, you know, he was always a political person. He also went to Berkeley, although we weren't there at the same time. And so for him, yes, it was, it was about, you know, we're not doing this as I was before. When I had my other firm, that's how I made my living, right? So, you know, I have to be honest. My motivation was, yeah, like you read about, and, you know, it was to be in Landscape Architecture magazine and make money and get famous being a landscape architect and get big projects and, you know. But the second time, you know, because of life and, you know, I guess hopefully growing, and, you know, deciding, yeah, to start Design Jones wasn't about making a living like it was the first time, and having a partner who was really about, you know, changing the world, telling stories, being a filmmaker. Yeah, so from the beginning, that firm was, yes, really about what we're doing now. And, you know, like we have people that work for us, but often, you know, people come and they don't want to work for us, and we're really happy because often young people come, yeah, and they want to do the big corporate plaza, the, you know, 10-acre resort in Aspen, the big golf courses. Landscape architecture firms, the big, you know, they do those kind of work, that kind of work. And so we don't do that. You're going to be doing, you know, something related to some, you know, nonprofit or some community trying to get something.
Shut the fuck up.
Oh, I don't think that was you. Yeah. I don't know who this person is. Okay, I think they were. Sorry, Diane.
She's in there twice. Can you get her out?
I think it was.
Apologies for that, Diane.
I don't think that was towards you. I think the person didn't have their thing on mute. Okay. But I can't. You're done. Sorry. That happens to me sometimes when my phone's not on mute and I think it's on mute, and then people start talking.
Can you get Diane back?
Diane's back.
Yeah,
She's waiting.
Yeah.
She's waiting for his pictures.
Wait, where did the noise come from?
Somebody joined. Yeah, I think we got it figured out. Can you hear us, Diane?
Yeah.
Apologies.
No problem. Anyway, yeah, so I made a decision, you know, that this firm would be something different.
Courtney, I thought I saw you had your hand up at a certain point.
Yes, I'm
Shut
sorry.
the fuck up, Courtney.
Okay.
I don't know who this person is.
Where's it?
Jennifer Jenkins.
Oh, it's Jennifer. Okay.
Jennifer Jenkins. Wow.
I'm trying. I think you need to remove me. Okay. Sorry about that. Their choice.
And don't let them be able to sign
Okay.
in again.
Okay, one second.
Sorry.
Remove.
But first time?
Yeah. Okay. Okay.
Sorry about that, y'all.
I'll tell you later. Okay. Okay. Oh, I couldn't. All right.
Dr. Diane, thank you. I'm in good company. We both got cursed out today. I am going to take that. I want to thank you so much. I don't know much about landscape architecture at all, if anything. But just hearing your stories, hearing more about your background, so layered, so colorful. I'm leaving this conversation very inspired in community and being more engaged. And I really wanted to ask you a question about your time in Berkeley. I'm a musician, so with the musician's lens, like Berkeley is like hollow ground. It's been the centered reason through like so many creative, challenging times in history. And I wanted to get an understanding, like going to a school, a place that's vibrating with so much music, so much culture, so much connection and rebellion. How did what did you learn from your time there that you've taken on into your work that you do today?
So I learned that you can't be afraid. Because I had some experiences there, like, you know, I mean, one experience I had is there was I was at Berkeley like between 1981 and 1984. So I remember like the occupation of Grenada was happening. So there was a big Grenada. There was a big protest about that. There was all kinds of protests. There's always happening. But it was a project. It was a student project, but it was like a kind of a competition thing. And there was a public housing project in San Francisco. It was kind of a notorious one. It was up on a hill, a huge public housing project. I'm trying to think the name of it. Anyway, so they took all of the students who wanted to participate, which were, I think all the students were white except for me. And we got off the bus and started walking around, and the residents came out and started yelling and screaming at us, saying, you know, get out of here, this isn't a zoo, you know, and the professor rushed us all back onto the bus, and we went back to school. The competition went on, but nobody applied. I think there were only two groups, myself and my roommate, and these other two guys did the competition. And so they canceled the competition, which the four of us were very upset, but they talked to us. But, you know, I think, you know, other students didn't apply. But anyway, I learned, you know, to be brave, right? To take on, because a lot of even the projects we take on now, yeah, you're going to get stuff like that. People. So anyway, so I learned to be brave, right? And actually, I think we need bravery in this day and age right now. We need bravery.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Good
question. Someone on here, I was looking in the chat, they asked a question about what does plant selection play in your role in storytelling and design process? And I thought that was a great question because I was just going to say that you know, plant material is so important, right? On so many levels, right? Because I mean, that's the whole thing of like that maroon research is about how do we restore the landscape and then in even all these memorials. So plants not only, you know, they suck up oxygen, make the environment better. I mean, they suck up carbon, you know, in terms of like, yeah, when you think about climate, they suck up carbon, they, you know, release oxygen, you know, they're really good, you know, mentally. That's why in like the Rouse, after you go through, you know, the timeline, the history of this, you come into a garden because they, you know, they kind of help you relax and they're beautiful. Like, you know, so plants are really important in terms of the storytelling, the emotion, and the environmental aspects of, you know, the clean water. So, I mean, that's why I like landscape architecture. I haven't talked about, because I'm talking about, the issues, those kind of things, but plants are key. I mean, they're like the solution, one of the solutions to dealing with these issues, and I think we overlook the importance of plants and plant materials, and especially like plants, give us the history. Like I try to use natives a lot because they're lower maintenance. They tell the history of a place. If you're doing the design in Louisiana, you got to stick in some palmettos somewhere. And although Louisiana is getting more and more tropical, so I'm finding that, you can grow mangoes and avocados and all kinds of things that years ago you couldn't, we're going to die there. And it's because of climate change. So the plant palette is kind of shifting, right? But still, you want to be aware of that and try to use natives. But that was a great question because plants are important to the story, and how you want people to feel.
Does anybody else have any questions? Yeah. No pressure. If you don't have a question, that's okay. Well, I guess then that is the end of the event. Diane, thank you so much for sharing.
Thank you. Great
Yeah.
questions. And I enjoyed being with you. I wish I could have been in person.
Yeah. There'll be other opportunities. We'll be here.
Come on down.
Yeah. Yeah. And speaking of that, the next event will be on August 16th with Paige Como. I think you would like his work too. He works with Colocate in New Orleans.
Yes.
So there will be that'll be the next one. So feel free to visit us anytime.
I will.
And I just want to
Should you open the door?
no, there's someone on the phone in the other room. Today has been a whirlwind.
The day of interruptions. Energies too.
They're very different, vastly different.
Yeah.
But just want to thank NUNU for hosting us, the Louisiana Historic Preservation Fund for funding the project, Art Transit Authority for being a part of the project, and Levity for being a part of the project as well, and just the incredible team that put it together. Again, you, Diane, for sharing the wealth of information that you've shared with us today. So thank you.
All right, anytime. Thank you. Bye.
Bye. Bye.